You know, one of the things that the 90s gave us, and we're now, many of us, and the generation stretches, so some are young and some are looking at their middle age by then, it gave us one of the great periods of romantic comedies. Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail and Pretty Woman and Groundhog Day and Four Weddings and a Funeral and The American President and even Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. All of that were in the 90s. It did suggest that side by side with Thelma and Louise, who really can't live in the world of men and women as it's been shaped. Somehow the people in those romantic comedies can and can be happy, and we loved it.
Hello, and welcome to Not Born Yesterday, a podcast dedicated to older adults and the challenges and joys of aging. I'm Miriam Goodman. Not Born Yesterday examines the problems and solutions of growing older today. We bring you the wisdom and voices of experts in the field of aging and offer tips on how to feel your best, use your lifetime skills and experience, and make the coming months and years as fulfilling as possible.
I'm Lynn Winter-Gross. Not Born Yesterday is brought to you by Next Village SF, a local nonprofit providing older adults with support to help age in place.
Today on Not Born Yesterday, we're taking a break from the hard things about aging and once again looking at the cultural changes of our lifetime, specifically through the movies. Do you remember the first movie you watched in a theater? Maybe it was even in a drive-in with your family and you all sat in the car together. Wherever your journey began, grab some popcorn and think about how we've been influenced by the movies and how our generation influenced the movie makers of the last 70 years.
Here to educate us about the relevance of our movies on our values, belief, and culture is Dr. Larry Eilenberg, Professor Emeritus at San Francisco State University and an expert on movies from the silent films to whatever Hollywood releases tomorrow. Dr. Eilenberg, welcome to Not Born Yesterday.
Thank you.
Saying that movies reflect cultural values or influence public opinion, is that overstating the significance of movies?
It's probably understating it. The movies have been so much a part of our collective imagination, and particularly for the boomer generation. You know, when I thought about our conversation, King Kong was really important to me, and I think to our generation. It was, of course, a film of a previous generation, but I watched it over and over again, and I think there was something about that huge ape confused by civilization, being shot down in really, the most dramatic way on the top of the Empire State Building, being done in by civilization. I'm probably stretching a point, but I think that for me at least, King Kong was a kind of anti-hero and informed me as I became an adolescent and a rebel, as so many of us were, with the sense of not fitting into a civilization that might, if we didn't do something about it, destroy us. I don't know how many people think about this when they think about those musicals that shaped us. Over and over again, they're about peoples who are at odds with one another, who are strangers to one another, whether it's farmers and cowboys or whether it's whites and Asians in the South Pacific, or over and over again, Rodgers and Hammerstein are really trying to express musically and in an American vocabulary that's still so resonant, the very idea that we can cross the boundaries that seem to separate us. But as we became a little bit older, as we got into our tweens and our early teens, and for me at least, that was the 60s, there were so many movies that, going back to your first question, that shaped just our very fundamental approaches to the world. I made a little set of notes for myself for our talk, and I was looking at some of the movies that in the 1960s were so important to me. And of course, The Miracle Worker and To Kill a Mockingbird, as we came of age, so many adversarial kinds of heroes were important to us, whether it was Gregory Peck, in To Kill a Mockingbird, standing up and being defeated by the forces of bigotry in the South, or whether it was, gosh, I don't know how much you remember of The Miracle Worker, but that movie said that the people who we thought had no voice could have one, and talk about something that really informed our generation. The idea of giving the opportunity and the space to those who didn't have a voice has been, I think, a through line for pretty much everything that we've really mustered our courage to propel.
You started talking about the 60s, and I wanted to back up a little bit to the 50s when we were much younger, but there was this optimism in America after the war. There were the suburbs, and people, seemed to have jobs, and everybody was moving ahead. And we had movies like Father the Bride and Singing in the Rain. But there was also this anxiety. Maybe Rebel Without a Cause was the first example of it, but there was talking about maybe there's too much conformity among the rising younger generation. So do you think the films of the 50s had an influence on all these important things you were talking about in the 60s?
By the time the 60s are happening, not only Easy Rider, but The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde. Even on the comic side, the producers, the first version of the producers, were all saying, cultivate the outsider in yourself rather than the person who's looking to go into the Wall Street or what have you, insider domain. And 2001, talk about films, and that's one that the critics and the historians still rank amongst the greatest films ever made. It gave us that mystery with that object, and then throwing a bone up in the air, and the next thing we're into space and machines are trying to take over. What a curious parable it was. And I remember late night conversations about what it all meant. And I think it was a film that sort of suggested, as we were entering the space age, was on the horizon, that what we were going to find were mysteries that were deeper and less solvable than what we knew from our science fiction, where those mysteries were more easily solved.
So we've kind of touched a little bit on the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. But before we go ahead, you once told me that Wizard of Oz was your favorite movie, and I wanted to know why.
Well, it's probably not anymore, but it was at a time. It was when I first saw it on television, it was an event. Remember, we didn't have the ability to tape shows, so we all just kind of waited until it came around, and it was a favorite movie for a lot of reasons, and the reasons changed in time. I think originally, one of the things that was extraordinary was I think the first time I saw it, it wasn't in color. I saw it in black and white. And then the first time I saw it turn into color from black and white, I realized the movies could just technically do something extravagantly powerful when it told me that the real everyday world was a black and white world, and that there was another possibility that I could dream of that would turn the world into color. So that metaphor that was just in some ways a technical device was hugely important to me. But I think the lessons when I was a young person were just really important. About brains and hearts and all the things that are the gifts that Dorothy acquires along the way as she gathers her tribe.
To go back a little bit, you'd said that the 70s was the greatest decade in the history of American cinema, and talked about Coppola and Scorsese. Which movies do you think had the most impact on us as young adults?
It was the heyday of probably our two great comic filmmakers, or two among our great comic filmmakers, and that was Mel Brooks and, of course, Woody Allen. And and those films, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein and Annie Hall and Manhattan, I think gave us a comic version of the world that was hugely central to the way we saw it. But it went hand in hand with Taxi Driver and Norma Ray and Deliverance and these very dark films. And I think they all kind of added up to a 70s, not only flowering of the cinema and a willingness in the comedies and in the dramas to embrace ambivalence, which really was not part of the films and the film culture that preceded it. And it's not really a big part of our film culture now, but it was so big then. We could take unhappy endings. We could take comic gestures that weren't easy. There's a darkness to those comedies that just like there was a crudity about Mel Brooks's comedies that I think we're part of that era. We're part of the 70s willingness to say things aren't as simple as you think they are. Nothing fits into a box. Don't try and put things in boxes. And then, and you mentioned it, it's also the era where the big tent movies happen, Jaws and Star Wars, and all of a sudden we're under a big tent. This is not only water cooler movies. These are the movies that everybody knew. I mean, and everybody went to. Again, I think Jaws and Star Wars and The Exorcist probably are the three big tent movies of the 70s. I think all three of them in their ways were serious movies. I think they had important things. Jaws not only is a parable about nature being less kind than we want to Disneyfy it, but also it's about the fact that there's just jaws that are going to bite you, that are out there, and they're going to rise out of the placid sea, and you never expect it, and then you got to fight for your life.
It seems to me that though underneath all that, there's a theme of rebellion a little bit. Even rebellion in Star Wars, rebellion in Saturday Night Fever, even, and The Godfather, of course. How do all these things again affect the viewers, and what do you see in the culture that responded to that?
Yeah, rebellion. It's absolutely central to the movies that we saw, and continues to be. Though it's not as though things ever stay the same. I mean, change is good, and change happens whether we want it or not. Sure, Wall Street was an emblematic film of the 80s, and that line, "Greed is good," was either anthemic or the words of the devil. It's interesting that it takes the 21st century to come back and give us Martin Scorsese's Wolf of Wall Street, which both reiterates some of the warnings that we had back in the 80s, but also turns them on their head as well. Do the Right Thing was a really crucial movie for us, I think, and still maybe Spike Lee's masterpiece. But you may remember it gave us a hot summer in Brooklyn and a race riot essentially happening out of nothing, out of incidentals, out of who was hanging on the wall of a pizza parlor. And the music, the rap, which was new to the movies, was so crucial there. But like what I said about Jaws, and what I said about the 70s, the movies that we found so crucial were movies that said to us, things aren't as logical, well-ordered, or morally clear as the movies of an earlier generation. the thoughts of an earlier generation, the religions of an earlier generation, the wars of an earlier generation were. For us, ambivalence, ambiguity, and illogic were part of what our best movies were, I think, embracing. And uh, and one of the movies that I identified with a lot because it spoke exactly to my life in some ways was The Big Chill. In The Big Chill, uh, the best of the bunch is in a coffin, and they're still trying to make sense of how that could be.
Let's talk about Thelma and Louise and featuring two women as main characters.
Yeah, it's a great film. It's really a terrific film, and the two of those women are rebels, as we've been talking about, who are unwilling to accept, to get, overly cliched about it, unwilling to accept the patriarchy that they've been handed. And finally, and I think this is something that our generation has held dear. I mean, they go over the cliff rather than give in, and our willingness to accept an ending like that and make it central to that moment in our history. I mean, we weren't youngsters when that film came out, but we were still holding on to some of the rebellion that it incorporated. One of the things that the 90s gave us, and we're now, many of us, and the generation stretches, so some are young and some are looking at their middle age by then, it gave us one of the great periods of romantic comedies. Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail and Pretty Woman and Groundhog Day and Four Weddings and a Funeral and The American President and even Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. All of that were in the 90s, and we did take them to heart. And it did suggest that side by side with Thelma and Louise, who really can't live in the world of men and women as it's been shaped. Somehow the people in those romantic comedies can and can be happy, and we loved it. One of the differences, of course, is that sex is really not a problem in those movies. It's really, finally it's good. And that was a nice message.
So you talked a little bit about the 90s, and I wanted to talk about the political films that came then. Now, Wag the Dog was one of my favorites, and Z, the movie Z. And do you think these were movies that were conversation starters when people left, or do you think they thought, okay, that was just a movie?
Well, I don't think they were popular. I don't think they were popular enough to be the big conversation starters that they might have been. I think for political movies, perhaps Malcolm X was maybe more far-reaching and continued our conversation about race in the way that Thelma and Louise continued our conversation about feminism, and both feminism and race were not settled issues and remain unsettled issues, more unsettled than I think we would have anticipated. But one of the things that I think, and I don't know if this speaks exactly to politics, but it speaks to something that I think is at least a cousin to politics, and that's that in the 90s we saw the rise of two or three, depending on how you count them, filmmakers whose work is very distinct and very different from pretty much anything that came before. And that was the Coen brothers and Quentin Tarantino. So 2+1 or two filmmaker teams. But Fargo, which gives us, and Pulp Fiction, both of which involve the law and order, law and order. They're kind of a baroque, a new American baroque, in which the world is really twisted. And I think we were used to turns, but maybe not to twists quite so much as we started to get. And the world of the Coen brothers and of Quentin Tarantino is a world that that we, our generation, really embraced. I think it spoke more to us even than the younger folks who were a big part of the audience. And when I think about both of those films, Fargo and Pulp Fiction, I think about the rebellion that you, Miriam, were highlighting, that you were underlining for us, taking a new shape, and the shape is a little grotesque.
How do you think this has changed how are being made and what subjects are being made, and that there's so many more ways to watch TV? We're not sitting in a big theater anymore with all of us talking to each other or coming in with each other. We're watching it by ourselves and on Netflix or Prime, or as you said, on our phones, and it can be a one-on-one thing.
Well, it's interesting to see how many movie stars and movie actors have migrated to the small screen. And if you listen to them, and they're people of our generation as well as younger, they talk about their ability in longer formats to create characters with greater complexity, with more nuance, because they're doing not television shows, not episodic television shows, but essentially, 8-hour, 10-hour movies that are done in chapters, but that people can see often at once because, the streamers drop them frequently the full 10 hours and you can, quote, binge them. So I do think that our generation and our age stoke appetites for longer format narratives that really are more easily accommodated on the small screen. So I think there's been brilliant classic work done, and people talk about the new golden age of television. It's really of the small screen, not exactly television. Some of it's streaming. It takes different delivery systems, but gosh, some of the stuff that I've seen and continue to see is extraordinary. I don't know how many of you saw Adolescence, which is getting a lot of attention in this awards season, as it deserves. And it was 4 episodes streaming. Each episode was done with one shot. That was, it's been done before, but I can only think of 2 films that did it. One of was a documentary set in a museum, but that was really something. And it's not anything that you would see at a movie theater. And it is part of, I think, the ecosystem that we're living in right now, and where that's going to go. I mean, some of the best filmmakers right now are trying to convince us that we need to return to the big screen by going bigger than ever. And so they're releasing things on 70 millimeter and IMAX and so forth.
So there's more creativity when the filmmakers have an opportunity to do 10 hours instead of 2?
Certainly some kinds of opportunities are much, much richer. And as I say, it's different from thinking about episodic TV, where you'd see, a new relatively self-contained piece every week. It's even different from the movies of the week that, foreshadow it.
One thing we haven't talked about is awareness of social issues. I mean, a little bit from Boys in the Hood and Do the Right Thing, but I'm thinking about Philadelphia. I'm thinking about Angels in America. Do you think people, or even speaking of television, Roots, do you think that really promoted understanding?
Oh, absolutely. Angels in America, you may not remember, was actually made by HBO, and it was a television movie, and speaks to what we were just talking about. But Philadelphia was one of several pictures about AIDS that I think humanized the problem for people for whom it had been demonized, and thank goodness it did. I don't think it ever had the appeal to the pockets who fund films that social issues like civil rights and the larger idea of race in America, or that our wars, successful or not, had. So there are a few films that dealt with it, but and I think Philadelphia is probably the best of them, but it just wasn't seen as something that the investors really wanted to put a lot of money into, and they didn't.
If you could look in your crystal ball, what's ahead for us in terms of movies and subjects?
Well, I think the thing that everybody's worried about is that we're going to be having subjects and movies that are selected by artificial intelligence rather than by human beings. And we know that artificial intelligence is going to be a game changer in ways we can't even imagine at this point. But I know that if I had a crystal ball, I would say that some of the big changes are going to be thanks to artificial intelligence. I just don't know what they'll be. I mean, one of the things that people, are already playing with is we're going to have new Gary Cooper movies. We're going to have new Katharine Hepburn movies because artificial intelligence can do that. Be able to speak into it and say, I want Katharine Hepburn starring in. So
A Star is Born.
yeah, I mean, how can that not be part of the future? I mean, we know that it's possible, and once it's possible, we'll do it because that's what human beings do.
I'd rather bring back the films of Frank Capra and have everybody leave the theater thinking, oh, we can do this. We can change things. We can be kind.
But here's the thing. We can probably, say to a more advanced version of artificial intelligence, I want a Frank Capra movie set in, 2035, and it will be made, and it won't be an animation. So that's my crystal ball.
Well, thank you so much for helping us remember and celebrate the movies of our time. It's been a pleasure, and I hope everybody will want to go see some of those movies again, or maybe for the first time if they missed them. So our guest was Professor Larry Eilenberg.
Thank you.
Today on News You Can Use, we want to update you on the subject of sleep. Last year, we heard from Stanford professor Jamie Zeitzer on the subject of sleep and wanted to share his latest findings with you. For example, Professor Zeitzer says sleep wearables are useless. Taking melatonin has no impact on your sleep since your body's already making it, and blue light is no different from any other light.
While sleep experts are always telling us not to scroll through our phones or laptops before going to sleep because of the blue light, which excites us, Zeitzer says the blue light is not the culprit. It's the scrolling that keeps you up because the apps you're probably looking at, like Instagram or Netflix, were designed to addict you.
So what can we do to improve our sleep? Zeitzer says we should try to be outside in the light, especially in the late afternoon, as this will reset your circadian rhythms. And he suggests you find something calming to do between dinner and bedtime. It can be meditation or yoga or reading or even watching television. And of course, avoid caffeine at night. His final advice: don't worry too much about sleep. It does not improve with harder work.
And that's our podcast for today. Our thanks to our guest, Professor Larry Eilenberg. You can learn more about Next Village San Francisco at their website, nextvillagesf.org, or by calling 415-888-2868. Our theme music is from Hook Sounds, and Jason Dahlstedt is our engineer. And we thank you for listening. We'd love to hear what you would like us to discover and discuss. If you like this episode, please contact us at notbornyesterdaypodcast.org and tell us what movies shaped your worldview. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All of these are free and let us know our audience better. Be well, stay strong, and remember, you weren't born yesterday. I'm Lynn Winter Gross.
And I'm Miriam Goodman.